we are not here for just one singular purpose.
The path to enlightenment is not necessarily a straight line.
No, and the path to bliss is not necessarily blissful.
Welcome to Commune. We are on a mission to inspire, heal, and bring the world closer together.
Hello, Davidji.
Om. Oh, hello, Jeff. Yeah, this is how we wave in Queens.
Nice to be seen by someone of your stature. Thank you.
You're too kind.
Yes. You have graced us here on our commune. We're actually, for a commune, we're relatively well behaved, don't you think?
Yeah. Spectacularly. Did see a couple of red-tailed hawks out of control. There was a giant raven swirling around the moon yesterday afternoon. I captured that on film. I was going to climb that hill, then I figured I'll let the raven get closer to the moon than me. It's beautiful here. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for allowing me to hang out here for a few days. I've been loving it.
Yeah, I suppose there's many things here that could take on some kind of numinous significance. A raven flying across a full moon, refracting some crystal light.
Right, and the raven is the sign of death and rebirth. It's like, oh my God, yes, right here in this sacred moment, I experienced it.
We're too empirically minded to get carried away with these kinds of mysticism. Oh, ridiculous. Well, this is so I was trying to think the first time this might not be the first time, but it's a very memorable time that I spent in your presence. Although we've traveled to many far-flung places together in the Wanderlust days.
Yeah.
I remember running into you in the airport in Honolulu. That was a high point. That
was a highlight for me.
Yeah.
Not just, leading all those hundreds of people in meditation, but then being in the airport and being graced by your daughter in her leopard PJs. That was still, maybe they were even like pink leopard PJs. It was a powerful moment for me.
Those are still making a presence on a regular basis. Chez moi. I remember one thing you said. You shouldn't have great expectations when you go to the dentist if all you've done is brushed your teeth for 2 hours the day before. It's not exactly how you said it. You had a more clever turn of phrase. But, of course, you were referring to the practice of brushing your teeth.
Correct.
And you were making an astute analogy around the nature of practice as applied in this particular case to meditation, but just as practice in general, as a essential and crucial component to living.
Yeah. I think that's one of the really interesting aspects of metaphysical or spiritual journey or whatever that looks like. But even to the point of how we define a sadhana. So traditionally, we think of sadhana as I wake up, I do my morning prayer or meditation or connection to source or yoga or, look at my picture of the Dalai Lama and, and then I have an affirmation and then I get on my way.
Right.
And sadhana is really meant to be lived the whole day. And so, but our society is what's the least that I can get away with to make this thing happen? Mm-hmm. And so that's when I was talking about the dentist, it was you could either brush every day, you could brush a few times a day, you could brush and floss, you could brush and floss and water pick. You could actually live a life of healthy teeth. And yet there's so much other aspects? What about living a life of kindness, self-kindness, kindness to others, forgiveness to others, compassion to others? And we put those in like very distinct compartmentalized areas. And we're good at having the experience for like 5 minutes here or 8 minutes there or 15 minutes. We're not as good at the installation. And it's that critical installation of these practices or teachings or embodiment of them that I believe makes the difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy, as you say, to sort of compartmentalize these kind of modalities, often in a very sort of undesirable, morose kind of way. It's like, oh shit, I've got to do that for the 10 minutes and get it over with.
Right.
And then we think about it, okay, well, no, what we really want is our practice to punctuate, the other components of our quotidian life. Like, oh yeah, I want this to carry over. So next time, my children act up, I can find the space, But even beyond that, we seem, at least in the West, to be very fixated with this notion of product, of life as product and not process. Like going to the dentist and getting sort of a clean bill of health is the product that we're looking for, instead of, as you say, living like a teeth-friendly lifestyle, if you will. Right. Maybe pulling the thread of this analogy a little too far, but that there is certain acknowledgement of life as process that goes with this notion of practice.
Yeah. Well, that is beautiful, because we can celebrate and enjoy the process. As opposed to, because everything else is so outcome driven. And like, what's the result? And was that successful? Thumbs up, thumbs down, binary choice, good or bad. Or we can enjoy the process and like live the process, which I think is the thing that must infuse any spiritual journey, or really any type of self-inquiry, self-exploration. Because it's so easy, like, to beat yourself up. Like, I ate one too many bliss balls today for lunch. So I could either say that, or I could say, whew, I was loving those so much. I was savoring those chocolate morsels so much. That made me smile so much, right? And the flip side of that would be like, I ate one too many. That's an extra half a pound I'm going to pick up, and like, I'm going to be lethargic, or, and it's like, pick it. It's one or the other. But how about like, today I got to explore a cool and funky food item, whether I liked it or didn't, but like, that was today's experience. And I think you and I were talking about this concept of just like paying attention enough to cultivate our ability to witness. Just cultivating the ability without there being so much importance on the thing that we're witnessing.
Yeah. And refraining from assigning any particular valence to that phenomenon.
Right.
Oh, that's good or that's bad. But just to witness. And it's funny. I know we're both fans, and, well, at least I can speak for myself, acolytes of Alan Watts. And he says something along the lines, if your only concern is getting there, well, then the journey is going to just be dreary as hell, And when you travel somewhere and you're just absolutely obsessed with getting to that place, by the time you get there, you're just like completely worn yourself out, right, instead of actually enjoying the journey.
Well, we've trained ourselves from little kids. Are we there yet? Right? How many times have we probably said that? And how many times have you then heard that? Well, you're the driver. It's like, enjoy the rain. Look out the window. Watch it drip down the window. Like, really? That's what we're supposed to do for 2 hours? Like, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I've always enjoyed about learning from you and being in your presence is this tightrope that you walk between conveying deep spiritual wisdom and humor. And this is just so rare. There are people, there's some people that have written books about laughter, very serious books about them, right? But you seem to just very effortlessly walk that tightrope. Was that always kind of part of your signature?
Well, we had been talking about this concept of like winning formula. So for me, whether it's to be liked or to be included or to be seen, humor had always played a part of my childhood. And then there was that certain moment where I realized, but it's not the end game. It doesn't have to be like hoping I get the laugh. It can be people are disarmed when you're a little lighter. And we're talking about like deep truths, ancient, deep, profound, universe-shattering, cosmic, epic wisdom. And if I can sort of just make you sort of smile a little bit, perhaps even more, and when you're not paying attention, sort of like slide one of those truths inside, and then it's like, oh, where did I hear that? You'll be crossing the street in a month, like, did I see that on TV or read that in an in-flight magazine? Did I even have in-flight magazines? Probably not. No, they just like hear the exits. Don't take your mask off.
Right.
But I think that's for me. I see those worlds as similar. Humor is paradox. It's how close can you bring polar opposites and like have them dance together before it's like that thin line between discomfort and euphoria. And I think, it's been said that spirituality or enlightenment is actually being able to embrace simultaneously polar extremes.
Yes.
Can you see, a classic example is, can you see this terrorist simultaneously as freedom fighter? Not going back and forth like, oh, I could see that, and I could see that. Can you embrace them simultaneously? Can you embrace this this darkness, this pain, this crawling through glass as the most horrific, traumatizing thing, and yet the most beautiful awakening simultaneously? And I think somehow when we can sort of like dovetail humor into those more metaphysical, spiritual, or conversations of awakening or enlightenment, sometimes it's an easier portal, an easier access point.
Yeah. You talk about madhyamaka, or the middle path, and this notion of moderation that seems to play a part in many, many spiritual traditions. I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding around the notion of moderation. It gets sort of a reputation of being somewhat limp,
Right. Beige.
Yeah, where really it's a very brave and courageous expression of bringing extremes together into coherence and cooperation. And often that takes a tremendous amount of humility. It takes a tremendous amount of open-mindedness and non-judgment. Right. And this is always tricky territory, because sometimes there are not moral equivalencies out there. Sometimes, to use your example, the terrorist and the freedom fighter, sometimes that it's hard to see them that way. But I think that this is the logos, the underlying intelligence of nature is to bring things into moderation, is to find eubiosis or middle ground. And obviously we're living in a time where we seem to be polarized and atomized and pushed to the thinnest edges of the branch more and more. But I mean, I think humor can help that, because it's often a conduit for the truth, but also it cracks people open in a way. Yeah. And
it disarms them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some humanity in there if all of a sudden you're laughing with someone.
Yeah. It's sort of like that instant shortcut out of being head-centric. May not get to the heart, but suddenly you've left the head. And that's a great starting point for the epiphany.
Yeah, that's actually a wonderful point, because we don't actually have any scientific reasoning for why we laugh. And in fact, the moment that we try to explain a joke, it's not funny anymore, right? And so it's sort of like love. You kind of fall into laughter. You sort of fall into love. You don't ever generally want to fall. It's not something that you want to do on purpose. But here are these things, these phenomena that we can't put our finger on yet. They're just so intrinsically human. Right. So you make me laugh. And I think, I actually heard Chris Anderson, the TED guy, there's something very postmodern on the founder of TED giving a TED lecture on how to give a TED lecture. But he says, one of the first things that you should try to do in the first 20 seconds is make people laugh. Because not only does it establish a relationship between you and the audience, but the audience establishes a relationship between themselves.
Right.
And
it's powerful.
It's really powerful. So I'd love to explore a little bit how you became to be who you are, and maybe get a little wealth management advice along the way. And your story has been told, but I believe that to scaffold our conversation with a little biography is helpful for people, so they can see some of their own story in yours, because the path to enlightenment is not necessarily a straight line.
No, and the path to bliss is not necessarily blissful. So that is, I was not born enlightened. I know a lot of people who say their mantra was whispered to them in the womb and they were born enlightened. I did not have that opportunity. And I guess, it works for some people. It didn't work for me. Although my mother, at a very, very young age, I learned to read by my mother teaching me the Ouija board. So that's probably a piece of, I've never shared that in public, but yes, that a very, as long as once I could rest my hand on something, the first thing she had me rested on was the pointer of the Ouija board. And so that's how I learned to spell.
We'll have to break that out tonight.
I would love that. I would love that. So for me, that was a very, very clear path. I was born and grew up and had a fairly, straightforward path into the corporate world and into all, that kind of stuff. But I was always a renegade and always, a little bit of a rebel in all the various things that I did. And probably, just craving attention in some way, or, looking to be seen or heard in ways that were not being done at the time. But as I got more involved in the corporate world, I sort of also lost my soul. And I got involved in the world of management and then mergers and acquisitions. And I was pretty good at that, making other people a lot of money. I was not, necessarily making it myself, but, pretty successful in terms of, doing the role and living up to that. But at a certain point, I really felt is that all there is? There's an emptiness here. I was not necessarily growing as a person, and I was just fully dedicated to my job, and always had, well, I could never quit it, because if I quit it, then how do I pay for everything else, and how do I support, my family and do this existence? And so I remember that ultimately I did leave my job after 9/11, but I didn't have like a next step. I didn't have a plan B. So sometimes I believe that, are you running from something or to something? And I was distinctly running from something, but had no idea what I was running to. And I believe pain can be a really powerful motivator. And I was willing to take that leap and blow up my life. And so I did that, blew up my life and went on my, journey of eat, pray, love, without the eating and the love. Just a lot of prayer. And
Davidji as Julia Roberts.
Right, exactly. And so did that, in search of meaning, in search of the guru, in search of answers and all that stuff. And quite honestly, I kept coming up short. And I think the harder you look, the harder it is to find. When you're trying so hard to find answers, and of course the teachings of this whole thing is that, the answer is resting inside. What you seek, you already are. Just but didn't know that. And so the further you seek, the further you're getting away from it's wait. We have the answer just resting inside if you'll just slow down and get there. And that's what happened to me ultimately. I was able to really stumble into enough stillness and silence, combined with an immersion of the Bhagavad Gita and some of this, timeless wisdom, where suddenly I was oh, it's a divine convergence. It's message, messenger, and timing. If all three of those are right there, then I think transformation is really possible. And I think if just one of those is missing, you could have the perfect messenger and the perfect timing, but if the message is weak or beige, it's just it's not going to resonate. Or you could have the message and the messenger, and just as it's coming in, you look at your phone oh, my nephew had a baby. And right, exactly. And it's gone. And so I had missed it. And suddenly, while I was on my Eat, Pray, Love, my Julia Roberts, cloning journey, it hit me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And suddenly I realized everything. And then, I call these butterfly moments, where it's just, everything is just so crystalline. Everything is so obvious and so clear. Sometimes they stay for a flicker of a moment. Sometimes they stay for weeks at a time. Those who are more highly evolved, I guess it stays for longer. But, I was sort of in that glow for a while. And I was oh my, there is life after death in this life.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about a particular inflection point, an experience that you had in Lower Manhattan, and parenthetically, we were contemporaneously in that neighborhood at the same time,
yes,
right after 9/11. And can you tell that story about?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And we probably had just walked by each other. We didn't know each other. We didn't know. It's that. It's
message, messenger timing.
Right, exactly. Sliding doors. Oops,
Yeah.
Missed it. So yeah, I worked on the 82nd floor of Tower 2, and that was a pretty devastating space to be working in, place to be working at for a certain period of time. And in the wake of 9/11, I'm walking past a row of cardboard boxes that people are living in Soho, south of Houston Street. And I walk past this particular box, and this hand reaches out grabs my pant leg. This guy really hard, like pulls me in and gazes up at me. He's got these really like sea blue eyes, and like we make eye contact. And part of this was verbal conversation. Part of this was, I don't know, telepathy or whatever you want to call it. But he reaches, what my first response is like, this guy wants money. And I reach my hand into my pocket, and he instantly like pushes his hand against my hand in my pocket. And he says, "What's going to be on your tombstone?" And we're like frozen in that mode. And that's a fairly reflective question, especially at this point in time. And randomly, this is clearly, God speaking through this individual, I believe, or something happening here. I'm reaching in my pocket, and he says, "It's not about the money. The answer is in the stars." And I'm like, "What the F?" I don't even know. Yeah. I'm having like the deepest conversation I've ever had in my entire life with some random guy who popped out of a box, and he's not even like fully out. It's just like his hand and a little bit of his face. And I'm like, we're like frozen in time. It felt like hours. It's probably just like a couple of minutes. And then the rest of the conversation was this, like, he's not moving his lips and I'm not moving my lips. And all the traffic is gone and all the people are gone and there's no noise and no one's honking. And we're just like frozen in this bizarre space. And, it ends ultimately. And I do pull the few dollars out of my pocket and he's gone. And I pull the curtain aside and toss some money in there. And like, I don't even know what just happened. And I suddenly like realize that I'm hyperventilating. Tears are streaming down my face. There's just like a whoa, 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 whoa around me. My heart is racing. My knees are weak. I stagger about 20 feet to this apartment building and sit down on the steps there. And I'm just like, what just happened? What just happened? And it was like such a deep pull into, it was beyond my heart. It was like, I don't know, where does the soul reside? Is it like up there, or is it deeper inside? Is it next to your heart, that mini chakra, the Hrit chakra? Like, I don't even know where that was, but it felt like something, that he had just like reached inside so deeply into me, and then just pulled something awake. He didn't pull it out, but he just like pulled it awake. And I just, my life has never been the same from that moment. And that really is the spark that set me off, that gave me sort of like, there were two things in my life that sparked me having total confidence to just like move forward. One, my mother died when I was relatively young. And when she died, I was like, well, nothing this bad could ever happen. And that allowed me to break up in a relationship and quit a job, at my first job ever. So that was like, at which I would probably still be working there, because I would have been afraid to leave it. But it was really that type of confidence. And suddenly I realized, you know what? What is going to be on my tombstone? What is my meaning here on this planet? I need to make a mark. I need to have impact. I need to help heal and serve others. I need to make a difference. And that I had never had that feeling before, but that has sort of been my guiding light since that moment.
Yeah, that story struck me. Zen monks with their students, they often present these koans, right? It's like there was this Zen monk that just reached out and grabbed you and asked you this question for which you really had no answer at that juncture. Right. But it did propel you on your way. And, in stalking you prior to our conversation and landing upon that vignette, of course, I couldn't help but ask myself the same question. I'm like, what's going to be on my freaking tombstone? And not that life needs to be as reductionist always as 64 characters or whatever you might get on
It's
your
a
tombstone.
pattern interrupt
But
and a redirection of attention.
yes, but it did focus me. I said, God, what is going to be on my tombstone? And it's sort of a morbid topic to dwell on for too long. But there are all these traditions. Like in Stoicism, there's memento mori, or in Buddhism, there's maranasati. There's all of these meditations that are designed for people to focus on their own mortality, not to be morbid, but very much on the contrary, because the good news is you're very much alive, and you have this ability to bring your best self to this strange equation of life. I don't know if I have an answer in terms of what will be on my tombstone, but you begin to hone in on it a little bit. The fostering of community, building of community for me, as I begin to, examine my own life. What is the thread that I can pull through it? Right. And, you talk about the winning strategy, or is it
winning formula?
Winning formula. For me, the fostering of community comes from a place of great pain originally, where I was this, chubby kid with hip dysplasia, living in foreign countries, just wanting to fit in and be liked all the time. Right. So I just I'll do anything to belong or really fit in, at that juncture. And, but of course, that was a coping strategy. So I was willing to sacrifice who I authentically was to be part of a group, because we're so needy for connection. And in a way that led to a lot of suffering later in life, where I felt like I always needed to sacrifice some of who I was authentically, or it made it hard for me to put my thumb on who actually I was, because I would be just anything that would fit into a situation.
Right. What do you need?
Yeah.
That's who I am.
Yeah. People please.
What do you want?
But the flip side of that is that I managed to use that coping mechanism into something that became leverageable as useful, to build community and to bring people together. So anyways, I felt that story was prescient, and it's also just something that's universally applicable, because everyone can ask themselves that and get really clear about what their life.
Well, especially if we don't like what's going on in our life.
Yeah.
And instead we're like, oh you don't understand. My life is so horrible, or this is happening, or that's happening. We all have stuff like that. We all have darkness visiting us in some way. We all have our world turned upside down at some point or another. And we get to choose our next step. Sometimes it's a sacrifice. Sometimes it's a compromise. But realistically, this is the lesson in the Bhagavad Gita. Essentially, do your duty. Do what you were put here to do right now. What are you here to do? Oh, it's take care of your aging parents? All right. Then do that. Don't whine. That's your duty. That's what you're here for right now. You're not missing all that other stuff. That other stuff doesn't exist. Do the thing that you're here to do. And I believe one of the most important aspects is that we are not here for just one singular purpose, or then we would have, life would have been over at some point. We're here in certain waves. I call these Dri arcs. It's sort of like, what are you here for right now? What's this arc? Maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 22 years, whatever that is. But you're here to make an impact or a contribution, or to help heal and serve others in some way right now. And so similar to, your use of your chameleon ability, my use of humor, I believe, for you as a child and for me as a child, these were end games. And I believe now, instead, we use them as the means to greater expansion. You use community to create this environment for all this magnificent teaching and wisdom and connection. Communities don't always have connection. They can be very, very loosely tied together. But because of what you bring into the community and because of what your MO is and the purity and the authenticity of your vision, really community is not the end game. It's the means to this higher end. People are living lives of greater grace and ease because of the community that you have managed to assemble in so many different incarnations. And, for me, that's sort of like what humor is, I'm not waiting for the punchline and hope I get a standing O at the end of the joke, but I just hope that I can share enough tools and techniques and practices that people can move from having a state of mind to a trait of character. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help people move from state to trait. So if I can just, get you to pay attention long enough, or use a parlor trick, or use a soft conversation about a deep thing to sort of get you to have a better access point, then everyone evolves and everyone keeps expanding. So it's funny that you bring that up, but I think that we've both been taking these separate things, and our winning formulas of the past served us to a certain point, and now we've created these new winning formulas to take us to the next level of whatever that is.
Yeah. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you more about meditation, given that this is we've just made a course together. And maybe you can frame it within the context of your physical journey, because I'm interested in the variety of modalities that you came across along that journey, and maybe kind of unpack what some of these traditions are for people, whether that's Vipassana or Zazen or Metta,
Sure.
etc.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a meditation geek. I'm a meditation nerd. So give me some, neurological research on a bunch of people who are meditating, and my eyes light up. I get so excited. The people I stalk, it's John Legend and a couple of other people too that I'm really paying attention. But I'm also paying attention to Sarah Lazar, who's a researcher at Harvard Medical Center, or always who's the newest researcher? Richard J. Davidson. Who are these people who are doing this cutting edge weird stuff, doing MRIs on the brain during meditation? Or one of the things that Davidson did was attach electrodes to the pain centers of super meditators, monks who had been meditating for 135,000 hours. I think each of them had at least 8 hours a day for 3 consecutive years. That would be a super meditator. Those are people only living in GABA state. And he compared their brains to non-meditators. So stuff like that, you can really see well, what's the difference? How is this person going to respond to a certain technique, versus that? And, people are in camps. It's like everything else. People are no, if it's not mindful, it's not meditation. No, it's got to be Vedic. No, it's got to be TM. No, it's got to be primordial sound. No, it's got to be nakshatra. No, it's got to be this mantra or that mantra. So there's a lot of pressure. My philosophy has always been, let me explore them all. Some stuff resonates, some stuff doesn't. And I would think everyone could do that. And then you create your own, you pull a thread from this and a thread from there and a thread from here, and you weave your fabric, of your life. So of course, we believe, so the story goes, that the Buddha attained enlightenment from sitting under the peepal tree, which became the Bodhi tree after he awakened and after the town became Bodh Gaya and from Gaya, and he became, the Buddha from Siddhartha. And so this technique, we believe, is like the original insight, the original, shamatha or samatha, however you want to pronounce that, but the original self-reflection, consistently going back to the breath, coming back to self-reflection, back to the breath, self-reflection. We know that we're always going to drift away to thoughts. That's going to be part of life on planet Earth. Yeah. We know we're always going to drift away to sounds, because as long as we can hear, we're going to hear sounds. At least your eyes, you can close them so you can stop the movement or whatever that might be. And we know that we're always going to drift away to physical sensation. And like one of the most core aspects is, so can we have an object of our attention, like an anchor that we can just keep coming to, not to run away from thoughts and sounds and physical sensations, but just it's like, oh, I like coming back to that. That feels good to me. So a couple of things, and I'll just share 3 different techniques so we could sort of see the difference in those. So traditionally, watch your breath, notice your breath. And so we could watch the breath as it comes from here, starting point, into the tip of our nostril, through our nose, into our sinuses, down our throat, into the top of our lungs, the middle, the bottom of our lungs, down as low into our belly as it can go, and then back out. So that's one technique. So let's just try that right now. Mm-hmm. And eyes can be open or closed. It doesn't really matter. But let's just breathe it doesn't make great radio. I had a radio show for a while, so I understand, staring at someone while they're sitting there, silently repeating a mantra. It's loser TV, and it's definitely loser radio. And it's not built for podcasts, but we'll just do it for just a couple of, so just let's notice. And you sort of notice also the slower you go, the more elongated the whole process is. The slower you go, the quieter you go. And this is what's known as quiet, continuous breath, silent and seamless. And now we'll change the location, the object of our attention. Everybody feels the breath come into them someplace else. Some people, it's very distinct. It's coming in through my nose, or it's coming through my mouth. But some of us actually feel the breath of the universe coming into us, maybe in our heart or in our belly. A lot of times it's different chakra touch points, or our throat, or our third eye, or the top of our head, or the side. So close your eyes. And where do you feel the breath of the universe sort of landing inside of you? And maybe you could even place your fingertips on that space. And you realize we actually have this orientation point where we feel the breath come into us. This is a mindfulness technique as well that I learned from Jon Kabat-Zinn. And if that space changes, feel free to adjust your fingertips, because sometimes it can move up a little bit, higher, lower, left or right. And it's actually comforting to identify that place and sit with it. we'll just change it up one more time. See if you can paint a ribbon of breath in the shape of an infinity sign. It's not in your physical body, but maybe right in front of you. And you just watch as you paint a ribbon of breath in the shape of an infinity sign, and just either follow or lead that breath through that infinity sign. And there's no right speed. It's however you're floating, however you're flowing, whatever that feels the most comfortable flow. And now take a long, slow, deep breath in. And let that go. When it feels comfortable, you can slowly open your eyes. How was that? Was there a particular one that you were like, oh, that felt like coming home?
For me, the infinity breath.
Yeah, well, the beauty of the infinity breath, and the thing that actually scientifically or mechanically or mathematically or physics-wise separates it from the other two, it's a closed loop system. If we think about that, right? The first one, it's coming from who knows where into us, going down and going back out into who knows where. The second one, it's a location, but the breath is coming in past our fingertips and moving back out. But that last one, it's sort of like, oh, it's a closed loop. Even if I wanted to drift away, I'm just like in the sweet rhythm of the infinity sign in this closed loop environment.
It's very funny that this is sort of another Alan Watts-ism, but there's something about that infinity breath that is that you're just really grooving with the moment. That's it. And there's the question comes up, like, why do musicians play music? Well, they don't play to get to the end of the song, right?
Right.
They play music to play the music. Or why does a dancer dance? Well, certainly not to get to the end of the routine, or like the best dancer would be the fastest dancer. And so we often focus on kind of the bullet-pointed benefits of meditation. And absolutely, we'll talk about many of the kind of beneficial knock-on impacts of engaging in this practice and others. But there is also some sense to having no goal with it at all, and just to really just be grooving with it. And there's something just about the movement of the infinity loop of like, I'm just here grooving with the moment.
Right.
That's it.
When we talk, you and I had been talking about how, like, nature is distinctly, divinely or not, seems to be fairly rhythmic in its opposites working with each other, and standard deviations up and down with the mean running through things. And there's overcorrections in politics, and there's overcorrections in in the growth of a tree,
Right.
One way, or the other. And there's, obviously the physical, neurological, emotional benefits of having a practice, can't be disputed. But I believe, just like sometimes the red-tailed hawk just wants to keep catching the breeze and surfing on it, we are designed as well to sometimes go like, ooh, that feels nice. I think I'll stay in that. Not like, and this will help your glucose levels, and this will, lessen your cortisol and elevate your serotonin. I think at a certain point, it's like, oh, the human wants to play. let's let that happen. And I think the more time we spend in that space, we naturally find equilibriums. There's fewer overcorrections, high or low, and we get closer to that standard flow. I mean, there's equanimity in every aspect of the planet, and certainly it would be reflective in us as well.
Yeah, and we become more comfortable with spontaneity, if you will. I mean, this is a Zen practice. But to be able to, for example, answer that question, what will be on your tombstone, with like, I wear a white tennis shoe, God damn it, and that would be a completely acceptable answer for an advanced Zen student, provided that it was spontaneous.
Right.
and that the lesson there is that we can learn to get out of our own way. And, that we're in the river. The Tao is flowing. Whether we like it or not, you cannot escape the course of nature. We're in it. And so either we're going to become a skillful navigator and apply the rudder just so and be empowered by the river, or we can make life very difficult for ourselves by cognitive analysis, endless chatterboxing, and that is equivalent to swimming upstream, and that can be very tiresome and actually be the source of a lot of suffering.
And even the answer for me to that question, what's going to be on your tombstone, wasn't like, oh, let me start writing down what I want them to start carving there. The answer to that question was like, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There was no answer. It was just, it's like in Aldous Huxley's book, Island. Those birds are flying over the island, and every once in a while they go, attention, attention, attention. That's what that moment was. That was like the universe suddenly going, hello.
Yeah.
Just that.
Yeah. There's this, I guess I would call them a group of characteristics more than anything, called Brahma Vihara. Vihara meaning abodes, I believe, in Brahman, of course, the ultimate reality.
Sacred abodes.
And that these are certain characteristics that we inhabit when we're in a place of deep concentration or integrated consciousness. You can play with that if you but one of those characteristics is this notion of upekkha, or equanimity. And we tend to assign that notion with a lot of kind of passivity,
right?
And though I might argue adopting more passivity might be, given everything going on in the world, might be a decent approach to life. But I also think that there is a little bit of a misunderstanding there, that actually that in equanimity, you can still bring your full, passionate self to the task at hand, to the moment at hand, but without attachment to result. In a way, equanimity is a full recognition of the eternal now, that there's never been or never will be anything else except this ever now. And, I've started to think about that notion of equanimity a bit, because given how utterly distracted we are at every moment, or the competition for our attention. And I believe that one of the most precious gifts that we can give each other is presence. Yeah. And this is how I've, in some ways, undermines, I think, a lot of people think about equanimity as like, oh, this kind of like limp, dispassionate kind of state of being. But it isn't at all. It's effusive, really.
Yeah. Well, the Brahma Viharas, in Chinese, they're referred to as the four infinite minds, or the four immeasurables. And metta, unconditional loving kindness; karuna, compassion; mudita, empathetic joy; and upekkha, equanimity. Everyone misunderstands that. It's like, oh, you mean stoner? Stoner, dispassionate.
Right.
And I like to think more light, less heat. That's for me, that's equanimity. More light, less heat. I got enough heat coming out of my Pitta, Taurus, New Yorker, fingers. But if I can bring more light to each moment, and not necessarily even externally, let me light up inside. Equanimity really means being okay with loss and gain, with praise and blame, with pleasure, pain, with honor, dishonor. It means not buying into that shit. Guess what? You're on planet Earth. What are you acting so amazed because you lost this or you won that?
Yeah. And like, you might have accomplished something great at one point, and you put a book out and you got a great review, and you're lapping up that praise like a kitty laps up milk or whatever, and you're feeling really good about yourself. And the next day, someone calls you, or you fall down on the street and you sprain your ankle, and someone shames you, and you feel a great deal of shame, and then step back and notice that it's the same part of you,
yes,
that feels that pride and that shame. And the more that we identify with that and fixate on it, the more that we become attached to the symbol that we have for ourselves.
And that's the overcorrection.
Yeah.
When we were like, I'm the most amazing person in the world. I remember Wayne Dyer tells a story that he was on one of his books was like New York Times #1 bestseller for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 7 weeks, 9 weeks. And like the 10th week, it like dropped off the list. And he came home and he said to his wife, "Oh my God, I've dropped off the list. I've dropped off the list." And she said, "Honey, it's actually the book, not you." And
That's
he was
right.
like, "Oh yeah, that."
Right. It's like the two monks that go to the river that's flooding, and there's a woman there that can't cross the river. So one of the monks hoists her on his shoulder and brings her across the river, and they get to the other side, and he puts her down. She goes off, and the other monk is very, very concerned. And he says to the first monk, he's like, "Yeah, so inappropriate. What are you doing? You're breaking all of your codes and stuff like that." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I put her down back there. You're still carrying her."
It's brilliant.
It's a great one. In some ways, we're sort of fast forwarding, towards the end, towards the eighth limb, or the eighth step of the noble path, the samadhi, when we talk about Brahma Vihara, because really there's a long path to get from here to there. But when I think about metta or karuna or mudita or upekkha, but like, I think about like mudita, for example. When have I, or anyone listening, when have you had joy simply for someone else's joy, for no other reason? When have you felt that sensation well up within you only for someone else's good fortune. I mean, if you can put your thumb on that, then you're well on your way to being the Buddha.
It's usually like an Instagram reel where the soldier comes home and the dog runs up to them and they haven't seen each other for a year or something, But that's why it's so powerful, because it's like that 8 seconds.
Well, you're your full expression of yourself, which is essentially not yourself.
Right.
Is that you feel that there is no delineation between what it is like to be you and what it is like to be that soldier with the dog and the kid being reunited.
Right.
Or karuna, the identification of someone else's suffering as one's own, and the bringing forth of loving kindness and goodwill in attempt to alleviate that suffering. But these are this is in some ways I think about this state of being that is accessible to us all. And it is sort of like a state, like Wyoming or Colorado, except you don't have to get on an airplane. It's here, it is available to us. But there is some agency required to inhabit that state. And I suppose there's a lot of ways in there. So like the example that you gave, the various iterations on kind of breath-focused meditation, would you qualify that as vipassana or slightly different?
I would qualify all those as some version of a mindfulness meditation, where we were simply paying attention to what was going on, using our breath as the object of attention. In its full-on, vipassana, there's certain technique shifts that some people have versus others. But yes, if you can elongate that, we did it, I don't know, for 30 seconds each, just at the sampler pack. But if we can stretch that out and make it a daily practice, and that is the thing that I do want to stress, because we do, we started off talking about brushing your teeth. We do brush our teeth every day, and probably a few times a day. And we do poop, ideally, once a day. And we pee at least once a day. And we're ingesting, food and nourishment, and so there are certain like basic physiological things that we are doing, and we're taking a breath constantly, and our heart is beating. So there's like certain stuff. Can we get to the space where we're also introducing these breaks in the action, which we otherwise are not doing? Every single moment of our life is in activity. And when Elizabeth Blackburn won the 2008 Nobel Prize in Medicine, for discovering telomerase and doing her work on telomeres, and they said to her, like, so, where's telomerase, created in the body? The telomerase is that lubricant of our telomeres, which hang off our chromosomes, which you just look at with an electron microscope and you go, you're looking good.
Yeah.
You're looking good. You've got long lubricated telomeres. You're going to live for 6 months unless you get hit by a bus or something. And if your telomeres are short and craggy, you could look at them and go like, it's not looking good. You're going to die soon. So imagine there's like a factor going on inside of our blood that we can see as a sign of not just like, oh, you're okay, but like good health and bad health. And they said to her, so where's telomerase created? And she was like, I don't even know. This is the Nobel Prize winner, and she didn't say it like that because she's Australian. But and then they said, so okay, you don't know how is it created? And she said, it's created, and these are her words, it's created by us introducing a pattern interrupt into our default mechanism. When I heard that, I was like, oh my God, it's amazing. What's our default mechanism? And she followed up with, our default mechanism is being in activity every other moment. Looking and searching and finding and doing and doing and doing and doing and doing, and then looking some more, and then resisting the moment, and then looking for more moments. And, they said to her, so so what's the way that we can cultivate it? She said, I only know one way, and that's by practicing mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And so, she wasn't a meditator at the time. She might have said, oh, it also includes mantra-based meditation. Oh, it also includes a body scan. The beauty of all these research studies on meditation, and this is really important, that everyone who's ever said, but my meditation is filled with me replaying a dinner party or a conversation that I had with my sister, or, some traumatic moment back in time. Not one of these research studies that shows inflammation comes down and neurological expansion in your prefrontal cortex and executive decision-making gets increased, as well as your language and your memory and spatial orientation, like all these things. Not once in any of these research studies, and I have read thousands of abstracts, because that's like reading comic books for me. Mm-hmm. Not once did they say, oh, and what were you thinking about during that meditation? Not once did they say, well, wait a second, were you like scratching an itch or listening to a plane or harping on some grievance that you had? It doesn't even matter. We just have to show up and do the thing. It doesn't matter what else is going on. There's no like high-minded thoughts. Oh, you were thinking about Alan Watts versus how many avocados you should pick up at the store. That's a much higher level. You're really transcending. There's like, those conversations don't exist, and those aspects of the study don't exist. So, it's sort of like saying, brush your teeth a few times a day. Even if you have a crappy technique, even if you're using like, I don't know, the special Costco toothpaste or like whatever it is, guess what? You're still going to be like nourishing your teeth. And so it's not like, oh, got to have a rigid spine and only must be thinking about insightful things and saving the planet and serving the world. You could be thinking about, that you're going to like have a conversation with someone and it's not going to be good, or you're scared to have it, or that you've been struggling with some aspect of your life, whether that's your weight or your memory or your self-kindness or whatever. It's okay. The thing still works. You just have to show up and do the thing. And it's a break. It's your brain taking a breath. It's actually a break in the action that we're not giving ourselves in any other way. Even when people say, but bicycling is my meditation or hiking is my meditation. Still an activity. According to the Nobel Prize laureate, I would say it's not introducing a pattern interrupt into your default mechanism. Your winning formula is always being in movement, in motion, doing, high achiever stuff. I get it. So let's see if we can carve out this other thing to infuse us. Because one of the things about the Brahma Viharas, they're called abodes. What's an abode? It's a place where you're supposed to live. So not just visit occasionally. They don't call them, the Brahma Retreat Center. They're the Brahma Viharas. They're the abodes of the divine. So if we can, spend a little more time there on a daily basis, as opposed to the occasional visit every 6 weeks for a retreat or something like that, then we'll start to like live them, and they'll be, installed, and we'll move from state to trait in terms of those. I would love to have those 4 immeasurables as like traits that are just like carved inside of me and pulsing, as opposed to the occasional state that I have once in a while when I'm feeling a little righteous or, pure.
Yes, I would. Yeah, I was thinking about the nature of love, for example. And there's this Rumi poem I know that almost everybody knows, at the Guest House, which is essentially this notion that emotions like love or jealousy, envy, essentially like visit your house as invited or perhaps uninvited dinner guests, and steal a bread roll and go out the back door, whatever they do. But essentially you're the house, and emotions are phenomena arising and subsiding in consciousness moment to moment. You're the sky, emotions and sensations are clouds. You are the road, emotions are pedestrians or bicyclists in this case, or automobiles. And yes, I think that we can experience emotion that way as passing phenomena. But I think that there's also this greater capital L love, love consciousness, if you will, which is not a love that visits us as much as we visit it. It is a higher state. And I've started to think about those characteristics of the Brahma Vihara being sort of like, oh yeah, I'm in that state now. You know, I'm feeling empathetic joy. I'm feeling a sense of equanimity as a product of my direct experience. That is a sensation that I am inhabiting. And, you know, if this practice has any goal, you know, that's not a bad one. And it really can make for a very fulfilling life. And, you know, to be honest, I don't know. I just glimpse it from time to time, feel it from time to time. But it seems as though the more that we can create that space, the more opportunity we have to visit that state. So I wonder if you could unpack a couple other kind of angle or approaches to meditation, like specifically mantra. I know that that's something that you've spent some time with. So what is a mantra, and what is mantra meditation?
Well, let's go back to the concept of object of attention. It helps to have, I mean, here's the reality. We're going to drift. We're going to settle in. We're going to begin our witnessing of whatever, and then give us 8 seconds. We're going to drift. That's who we are. That's what we do. So this, you know, so many people have, you know, put it like, referred to like monkey mind as like pejorative or negative or whatever. It's like, we don't even have to go monkey mind. Don't be mean to the monkey. This is human mind. We drift. We're drifters. We are the drifters. No matter what our intention is, we could go to the most magnificent museum. This happened to me. I was with my dad. We were, you know, gazing at the Mona Lisa. And within like, I don't know, 8 seconds, I was like, is that a smile or is that a frown? Is this the original? Did we have to travel all the way to France to see this? It's the same thing on my phone as I am here. Like suddenly there was like all I suddenly like, here I was in the presence of this magnificence. And within 8 seconds, I was someplace else. Right. And so we're going to drift, and we're going to drift when we're not meditating. We're going to drift when we are meditating. If we're having a thought form every few seconds, that would be normal. So it helps if we have an anchor. And so that last meditation we did, the infinity sign, because I believe it's a closed loop system, that happened to be a better anchor for you. But John Kabat-Zinn swears by the, let me feel where the breath is entering me and place my fingertips on that. For me, I got an early inculcation into mantras, and mantras, 2 Sanskrit words. Man means mind, and tra means vehicle or instrument. We actually get the word train, travel, transportation from the root tra, you know, in Sanskrit. There's lots of words we use in Sanskrit. It's not just like woo-woo spiritual cooked out stuff. There's like a lot of real world
words. Yeah.
Right. You know, we get the word ignite, ignition from the word for fire in Sanskrit, agni.
Yeah.
You know,
vidya.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Vidya, wisdom,
vision,
and videos.
Yeah.
So, you know, the beauty of a mantra is we repeat it silently. It's usually a word or a phrase or a few words, but there are long mantras. There are like, you know, there are big, you know, beefy mantras that Devapamal and Sanatnam Kaur and Krishna Das have turned into careers, you know, by the fact that they're so magnificent in translating those mantras into beautiful sound. So my orientation has been to, you know, mantras, and I've studied and become a teacher in a couple of different mantra schools, and that's just allowed me to just go deeper and deeper. That saying, I still love meditating using infinity breath, and I still love just, you know, that's really one of the reasons I got my Oura ring, was I wanted to track what happens to my physiology when I do this mantra, Om Moksha Ritam, or this ancient Buddhist one, Om Aham, or this one, So Hum. And suddenly, and so like after I meditate, I sit down and I go, okay, I use that mantra. Here's what my heart rate did. Here's what my body. And then I have sort of like the intangible thing that's not on my app. That's like, I feel softer now, or I feel fidgety, or like whatever that is. So we get to choose. And it was actually Dr. Herbert Benson 70 years ago. He's the guy who coined the phrase, the relaxation response, originally, one of the earliest teachers of Harvard Medical School. And he said, pick a mantra that makes you feel soothed. So if you grew up and, Ave Maria was like this soothing thing, or, Alhamdulillah was, part of your orientation that made you always feel, good and right, or the Lord is my shepherd, or Jesus is my Lord and Savior, or Hail Mary, or Shalom, or we get to pick it. We get to like decide what's a thing that I could feel in a groove about. So that was his orientation. So here's the guy who pretty much said, pick your mantra. It can be I am. It can be whatever you want. And if it feels good, go there. And when you drift away to thoughts, sounds, and sensations, and of course you will, then just ever so gently, don't yank back. Don't do anything with those thoughts. There's lots of schools of meditation when they say, take the thought and then open up a little jelly jar and then place the thought in a jelly jar and then seal it, and like Anne Lamott, and Bird by Bird, and then put it on the shelf. I'm like, no, there's like way too much activity going on there. How about we just like treat it like a cloud? It comes in, we watch it, it goes, and then we drift back to the object of our attention. So for me, I love experimenting with different mantras. I like Chinese mantras and Arabic mantras and Sanskrit mantras. I'm big on Sanskrit mantras because that's been a lot of my orientation as well. But I encourage people, like, find your access point. Even if your mantra feels like an affirmation, even if it's like, I am love, and you're like, oh my God, that's like such a effective mantra. I think it's an amazing mantra. You show up every single day, and for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon, you say, I am love over and over again, and then you drift away and then come back to it. Guess what? Who's got more love going on inside them than that person who's using that basic English mantra? So the beauty of a mantra, in my opinion, is not for its meaning, but for its vibration. So even I am love, at a certain point, I stop paying attention to what it even means. I know what it means. I get it. Now I'm just going to get into that rhythm and that vibrational aspect, because I believe that all mantras ultimately are just entrainment devices for a higher something, a higher calling.
Yeah. My first introduction to mantra was through Herbie Hancock. So I was in the music industry for many, many years. I ran a label and a management company, and I had a young singer, wonderful young singer named Sonia Kitchell, who Herbie Hancock tapped to be in his band. And this, of course, is the legendary jazz pianist for people who aren't familiar with Herbie. But so I would, follow them along on tour here and there. And he had a chanting practice, mantra practice, that he employed right before every single show. So we were actually at Carnegie Hall in New York City. And, he kind of got to know me. I was in the green room and stuff like that. And then Herbie always had his kind of smaller room, like the room beyond the green room. And he's like, okay, well, who wants to come in? He's like, the only rule is once you come in, you can't leave. So I said, well, I'll come in. I don't know what's going to go on back here, but, and he began to chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And he is not known as a singer, but he had this kind of very deep, resonant voice. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And, he had the baddest musicians ever in his band. And so they were in there in this tiny little sanctum, tight. All Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And of course, I had no idea what it meant. I don't know anything from Buddha nature at that juncture. I'm just phonetically saying the chant, following along. And he would go. And, there'd be people knocking on the door. Mr. Hancock, we're sort of a union house here, and it's 8:01, and you got to get on the stage. Didn't matter. Right. Herbie was done when he was done. And that was kind of my first introduction to, I think that form of Buddhism, or that sect with, I believe that was like Nichiren or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. But
Tina Turner, same
deal?
Same school, yeah.
Okay. So, but in some ways, because I had no idea what it meant, I was just in the vibration of it.
Right.
It was so pure.
Yes.
And then I was like, every time I was backstage with him, I'm like, I'm in.
I won't leave.
I'm in. And that was almost the extent of my entire relationship with him, because he was always so busy otherwise doing press and whatnot, was just chanting. And in a way, I guess I would ask you this: is mantra almost a form of like sonic drishti, or and you might have to explain the notion of drishti, but just essentially an object to capture your undivided attention?
It is. Drishti is like attention. So even in yoga, if our hand is like this, and we're gazing at our fingertip, that's a drishti. A drishti can be any spot, any attention where we have, where we're typically gazing out, whatever that visual looks like. So it can be the wall socket, it can be a Sri yantra or a mandala, it can be a beautiful, sunset even. It doesn't matter. It can be the moon. But a sonic drishti, again, would be object of attention. And so the beauty of silent mantra versus mantra that's sort of like making its way through the physical realm through air and sound it's really the difference between here we are in the here and now, and here we are in the energetic space. So, for example, and I would invite everyone, we're going to like Om out loud. All right. You can close your eyes for this. We're just going to take a deep breath in. And when we exhale, we're just going to like Om as long and loud as we can in this moment. So let's see what that looks like. Close your eyes and take a long, slow, deep breath in. Now, long, slow, deep breath in, and we'll do that same Om, only silently. Let's see how long that lasts. Long, slow, deep breath in. I don't mean to be rude, but perhaps that Om is still going right now. Right?
I don't think that Om ever stops.
Right. Exactly. So that's the difference. And everybody's got their own school. If you will go to a chiropractor, he goes, adjustment's the answer. You go to a surgeon, let's definitely cut that out. We can go on and on with, go to an herbalist, it's herbs, go to, we can, but I think it's the same thing here. If you ask Krishna Das, how do you merge with the universe? He would say chanting, obviously. And I like chanting, and I like mindfulness, and I like mantra. But for me, silent mantra, there's just something sacred about it. And I like to use Sanskrit mantras because I didn't grow up speaking Sanskrit. No one here has been grown up speaking Sanskrit. I don't think it's been spoken as a language for over 500 years on the subcontinent of India. Now there are like 87 different dialects in Indian. Sanskrit's not one of them as a spoken language. But for me, that means like, oh my God, it's an ancient language. It has been rippling through the ether for thousands of years. And whatever I say has already been said. Let me just jump on that cosmic thread. So it doesn't matter whether it's an Om, whether it's a in English, in Sanskrit, whether it's a primordial sound. A lot of the ancient sages said, let's make these vibrations have no meaning. What's the vibration that leaves make when the wind rustles them? What's the vibration of the ocean hitting the shore? What's the vibration of a hawk flying over and squealing, or crowing? And suddenly we realized there's a whole bunch of sounds of nature that they don't have English translations. We get the same sort of kind of thing with the chakra vibrations. Lam, vam, ram, yam, ham, ksham, om. There's no meaning to these. They're just vibrations, and we use them for their vibrational quality. So knowing that yam is the vibration of the heart chakra, we can actually, what's that going to do? Well, if you believe this or not, it doesn't matter, but if it's like, if you don't like yam, you could use yum, because they both sound the same if you chant them out loud. And if you chant them silently, it just goes forever anyway. So, but, what delivers more unconditional self-kindness, self-love, self-compassion, self-forgiveness than, connecting to your heart and chanting the vibration of the heart chakra, the heart energy center. And so you don't have to, believe in anything or not believe in anything. Just like go to that space. And so I love, using different vibrations for different things. If like the code word for self-kindness, self-compassion, self-forgiveness, and self-love, if the code word for that is yam, let me just go there and use that vibration, which doesn't necessarily mean anything else. But for me, it's my direct, channeling or my download into self-care.
Yes, that is the first password. But what is the second password?
Swordfish.
Swordfish. God, you're so good. What kind of delineation would you make between meditation and reflection or contemplation? So, for example, we've talked about a number of different meditation techniques, but for example, like Stoicism has what I would categorize more as contemplations or reflections on gratitude, for example. How do you delineate between meditation and contemplation?
Yeah. If we could go back to, that conversation a little bit about sadhana, like what's the whole thing look like? What's included in your quote practice? Mm-hmm. So let's assume there's a morning practice and an afternoon practice. In India, there's the puja and the arti. In the Arabic world, in the Islamic world, there's multiple prayers throughout the course of the day. Let's go to Islam just for a moment, because Islam, there's a lot of debate over whether is meditation appropriate, is it not? Obviously, when we go to like the Sufi, the Sufis and the their dhikr, there's like, meditation's greenlit. It's okay. Within the more modern community, there's some details, if you're more fundamentalist versus more progressive, but the Quran specifically uses multiple words for meditation. And every meditation in Islam is another way for you to see God's miracles. So meditation isn't you just repeating, I am love. That would not, that in Islam, that's not the thing. It would be, but the Quran instructs us, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, go into the night sky and look at the stars and then just feel the miracles of God. That's it. At a certain point, you will not be able to do anything other than feel the miraculousness of God. And so I think that whether it's Stoicism or whether, this type of Christian contemplation, or whether it's even in Islam, the word meditate, and we even get like, well, let me meditate on that. It's been euphemisms have been created over, let me ponder, let me reflect, let me pay attention, let me allow. So far be it from me to say, no, that's not meditation. I think those reflections and those, insight meditation is really that form of meditation as well. I think sometimes asking such a deep question over and over until we get into some state that's beyond intellectual answers. Like if I said to you, what holds your stars apart in your universe together? All right. And just like, hang on to that one for a half hour and I'll get back to you. And that's really all you did. You asked that question, what holds my stars apart in my universe together? Or how can I help others, heal others, serve others using my unique gifts, my special talents? Or what's going to be on my tombstone? Or how can I help raise the vibration of the planet? As long as you weren't, formulating strategic plans in terms of the outcome of that. It's like when I was asked what's going to be on your tombstone, the answer isn't, here's how I would like the first line laid out. It's, am I even going to have a tombstone? Like, why am I here? It suddenly forces you to go so much deeper. And I like to ask the question as one of these deep reflections, who am I? Who am I? Or who am I when I'm at my best? And so what I like to do is first settle in a little bit. Then I refer to these as sacred questions. I'll ask, who am I? What am I grateful for? What does my heart truly long for? What's my purpose? Things along those lines. Maybe wait for like a minute for answers to come. Then I'll invite an intention, and that's part of my practice as well, inviting an intention into my awareness, maybe a state of mind or a state of being that I'd like to embrace at a higher level, just for today. And if I've done like all of that, that's sort of like my lead-in or my appetizer portion, then I'll use a mantra or watch my breath to go even deeper. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if we look at it just as like, what's meditation? I would say the whole thing is a meditation, and the silent part is only a component of that process. And a lot of people might say, there's a lot of stuff for me. I got a heavy schedule. I got stuff to do. I can't be like asking, who am I when I'm at my best? And I would say, really? You can't ask that question to set the trajectory of your day? You're just going to like show up and like hope that you're your best at the end of the day? Are you asking the question, what did I learn about myself today? What did I learn about life? No, of course you're not. So if you're not setting yourself up and prepping, for like typing the address into the GPS, you don't have to go there, but with a higher likelihood you'll get closer to where you think you wanted to go. So if we can set a trajectory, and then, as the second meditation of the day, we could sort of like release some of the energy we absorbed, I think that's powerful stuff. And I think to ask questions, to start conversations with something, your higher self or your best expression or God or whatever that looks like. And, you might say, this is going to get in the way of my connection to God. I don't think so. I think this brings you closer to whatever you believe in. You've typically just been asking for stuff your whole life, whether it's been praying or begging or requesting in a very, very formal and civilized way, or negotiating. We negotiated COVID, everybody here. We totally co-created this thing. We said, I want less of this and less of that and less pollution over China and fewer cars on the road. And I want this and that. And the oil companies, I want them to shut down. And I want to stop working so hard, and I want to spend more time with my family, and I want to like not have to see that person all the time. And I don't want to go out with all these people. And collectively 7.6 billion people manifested this, so there's a lot of, the power of prayer. But we're mostly begging and praying and asking, and we're not spending a lot of time listening. And if we can just give ourselves permission to just let the noise, not the noise outside of us, the noise inside of us. This thing, just let it slow down a little bit. This thing, just let it slow down a little bit. Just like dedicate some time for me to just breathe. That would be it. And the beauty of that is we have all these techniques to do it. I don't have to say, oh, I want to stop thoughts. I can just repeat this thing over and over and over. And guess what happens? Those thoughts, they sort of dissipate. And then, of course, I drift away to them. And then I drift back to this thing that I repeat over and over, which has no meaning. It's just a vibration over and over and over and over. And so I think that silent part, or that meditative part of the meditation, really helps crystallize everything. We know it's creating telomerase, if nothing else.
Yeah. It's increasing longevity and lifespan, if
right,
only that.
Right. If only that. And for what? So we could work harder and never reflect?
Yeah.
So I think self-inquiry, it's a big, for me, that's a big thing. Self-inquiry, self-reflection. Mm-hmm. It's part of the original teachings of Patanjali in the niyamas, svadhyaya, self-study is an important component of life. How do we learn? How do we grow? It's by sometimes struggling or suffering or failing and then getting back up. And sometimes it's by holding up the mirror and being honest with ourselves. And so I think those are beautiful aspects to weave into your daily practice.
Yeah. That's really well put, and gives me something to think about, or not. For example, as you were untangling that, I thought a lot about gratitude and what that actually really means to me. And yes, thankfulness, sure. I'm thankful for my great fortune, and there are too many to recount. But that didn't feel like an ample enough definition for that word for me. So I started to kind of really think, like, what does gratitude truly mean to me? And I landed something closer to the idea that gratitude is best reflected in the works and actions in which you engage that reflect the miracle of life's gifts. So that it wasn't enough just for me to sort of feel a sense of thankfulness, but that I actually, in order to acknowledge it, that I needed to engage in work and action, and that I needed to live a certain dharma. And that's a very sort of a contemplative approach. That is a very intellectual, and I'm using a lot of like concepts and words and semiotics to like get at something. And then, but it's not, it is useful, that I know that gratitude for me means action. But then just to sit quietly in that, after engaging in that more intellectual reflection, and actually experience it as a feeling, as a sensation, and without all the words. And it's an interesting practice, at least it has been for me. And what I find is that when I have a sort of gratitude practice, that gratitude punctuates my life, that I do engage in those works and actions, that I am more giving and loving in my day-to-day life, just with anyone, that I'm there, all there. That's what I find the most, is that when I'm in a state of gratitude, that I'm completely present for people. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not thinking about something else. I'm not drifting off. I'm just right there. That's the best thing I can do. So,
You're a gratitude alchemist.
Trying.
Really, you're transmuting it, we look at like Martin Luther King, channeled his rage, transmuted it into, distinct action, distinct civil action, communal action, and you are a transmuter of that. So gratitude acts to a certain extent like fuel for the work that you do. It's beautiful. I mean, it's so great.
In one of your books, I think Secrets of Meditation, you get into the stages of consciousness. And I think this word consciousness can be very bewildering for people. Can you Sherpa us through consciousness as a concept and subsequently through its various stages?
Sure. In its most basic form, consciousness is awareness. It's just awareness. So, I'm conscious of the fact that we're in this beautiful location. Everyone else can't necessarily see it, but I'm looking at trees. I'm looking at you and nature. So it's just like this beautiful, sweet setting. I'm conscious that I have responsibilities. I'm conscious that I'm wearing clothes. I'm conscious that I need to make sure I lean into the microphone when I speak, which I probably have not done for the last 2 hours. I guess I wasn't so conscious. So, sorry, Nick.
But you're conscious of the unconsciousness.
Right. Yeah. And we can be conscious of our lack of consciousness. But, in the ancient wisdom traditions, there are essentially 4 states of consciousness. There's our waking state, which is right here, the here and now. There's our sleep state, which is, restful dullness. Nothing's really going on there. There's that thread between waking and deep sleep, which is our dream state. And then there's a 4th state, which the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi referred to as transcendence consciousness. But for thousands of years, people have referred to this 4th state as Turiya. What does Turiya mean? 4th. So in Sanskrit. So
tautological.
Right. So it's not like, yes, and what is the significance of Turiya? 4. So those are like the 4 states of consciousness. And these are all, real world. Everybody here has been awake, been asleep, dreamed, and sort of like realized I was beyond that for a flicker of a second or, whatever that is. When we meditate, we experience this thing within the meditation where and only 3 things can happen when we meditate. That's the beauty. Only 3 things. We could fall asleep, we could have thoughts, or we could experience stillness. It doesn't get more complicated than that. So you may say, no, my knee itched. Thought, no, I was having a conversation with my grandmother in another realm. Thought, no, I fell asleep. Sleep, and stillness. So that stillness can last for a flicker or for a longer extended period of time. There's actually a phrase for that, a word for that in Sanskrit, and that's Atma Darshan. Atma is soul, Darshan is glimpsing. So that's glimpsing the soul. So yes, it's perceived that theoretically that's something that could happen to me when I'm meditating. It could be a flicker. It could be like, was I asleep? Where was I? What was that? So in the state of Atmadarshan, you can't know that you're there. Where were you? You were merging with oneness. You were fully conscious. Whereas Patanjali would say you were recognizing your true nature, which is pure unbounded consciousness. And maybe you realized it for a billionth of a second, and then you had to take a breath again and come back into this flesh casing. And you're like, oh yeah, here I am, back here again. Maybe you felt your heart beat and it pulled you out. So those are like the first, 4 possibilities. But then there's 3 more states of consciousness that exist for us in waking state, not when we're meditating. And I believe we've all had some version of these. The 5th level of consciousness, not Turiya or Atmadarshan, but that 5th level is known as cosmic consciousness. And this is witnessing awareness. This is sort of like what people who are watching this podcast, you're sort of like watching this. If you suddenly floated back to observe you in the middle of this, or I floated back or saw it differently, or like, oh my God, I'm almost like seeing it from a 3rd person viewpoint, that's cosmic consciousness. It's suddenly where you feel that you could be separated from your experience. You watch your life experience unfolding in that moment.
Like awareness of awareness?
Yes. Where you sort of like ask the question, who's the person having that thought?
Right.
Is
there a thinker of the thought or a feeler of the feeling?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you can ask, you can go deeper using that, like, what do I feel right now? Who's feeling that right now?
Yeah.
Or what am I thinking right now? Who's thinking that? Who's actually, what's going on here? Where am I? Where's the remote? So that would be cosmic consciousness, witnessing awareness. And this, again, these are waking states. So I would encourage everyone to, like, you may say, well, no, that never happened to me. Maybe it did in a flicker. It's a higher state of consciousness. And we're not like leveling up here and going like, oh, so sorry. You're so pathetic. You did not experience cosmic consciousness. They come and go, and it all depends on a lot of other factors. But you may think, oh, I'm not high enough. Guess what? If you've ever had a traumatic moment, you've probably watched yourself from afar having the traumatic moment. And so suddenly we start to realize, oh, it's not just like bliss modes where I'm levitating and having, walking through sunshine. We've all had it. We've all had a moment where we've seen our life unfold, even if it's just for a moment at a distance. Then that moves us to the 6th. This is known as divine consciousness. This is God consciousness. This is where we see God in everything. And maybe you never had a witnessing awareness moment, but you've suddenly looked at the sun or a sunset or a sunrise or a flower or a bird, and you've said, oh my God, there's definitely something bigger than me here. And maybe you didn't say, oh, that's God, but it's where you start to see miracles or the divine or some expansiveness where you go like, oh my God, fractal theory. Look at that nautilus shell. How is that even possible? Or look at that fern. Every single aspect is perfect. Or that snowflake. Or that geode. Or, we can go on and on. Like, how's that stuff possible? Pine cone. Really? You don't believe in something godly or bigger than you? Take a look at a pine cone and go like, how'd that happen? How'd they do that thing? And so this is a state, of course, that can last in the moment as we, can be a state as we watch the sunset, or we can wake up in the morning and say, you know what? Life is miraculous. There's such beauty in every place that I look. And then suddenly that state becomes a trait. And then the 7th state of consciousness, and I know there's so many 7s here, 7 chakras and 7 vibrations and 7 states of consciousness. It's a magic number.
Yeah. Well, Buddhism was really good with assigning numbers to things. It's like built for Instagram, right?
Right.
Because there were some things scrawled on some palm fronds and things like that, but otherwise you had to remember all this stuff.
It's like 3 principles, 4 noble truths, 5 remembrances, 6 paramitas. It's like
8 noble paths. Throw it out.
Right.
Okay, it's number 7.
So number 7 is unity consciousness. This is oneness consciousness. Now, you may say, well, I've never felt that. But I would say, au contraire. Have you ever been to a concert and there are people there who are as devotional to who's ever on stage as you are. And suddenly they play that song and everybody, suddenly starts squirting oxytocin all over each other and dopamine. And it's just like this giant oneness fest. Ever go to a sporting event where suddenly, your team scores a goal or something, or, kicks a field goal or hits a home run or whatever, and everybody like on your side, suddenly, even that person who like you were looking at because they drank too much and they're unkempt and they smell, and you're like, my brother. It's that's unity conscious. Yes. Right. That's unity consciousness, where you suddenly, it's just like, everyone you see is like one with you. There's no separation of any. You're not thinking in terms of color or race or money. It's like the most important thing that you believe is the most important thing that they believe in that moment, and you just. And so we've all experienced that. Even if you're like watching some, like for me, it's like Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I know, not necessarily popular in this kind of community, but it's like I'm a devotee for years now. And like when those girls are on there, and Kyle and Lisa Rinna and, Garcelle and, Sutton and, like all that whole thing's going on, and Erica Jane, I'm like, oh my God. And everyone is my people, and Andy Cohen is my people. And, suddenly there's like even though it's like a sliver, a fragment of weirdos who are doing this, I'm experiencing unity consciousness in that moment. And so when we meditate, it's really only Atma Darshan, glimpsing the soul. That's a whole nother level of consciousness. That's a state of restful awareness, also known as restful alertness. But then there are higher states that we can wander through the world, either witnessing from a totally objective plane, where we can suddenly experience the divine or God or miracles as we look around us, even looking into the eyes of God. That's what I've been saying to myself throughout this entire time. Every time I look at you, oh my God, you're so beautiful. I'm looking into the eyes of God. It's like, I feel like so blessed. And then unity, consciousness. So these are higher states. We can cultivate them. I believe we cultivate them all through meditation, but it's possible for us to just, go to a concert and suddenly get sucked into that whole oneness of the universe.
Yeah, transcendent art is very good at making us all feel the same. I mean, true transcendent art, whether that be music or oratory, soaring oratory. That's what I think often. I mean, who, hasn't been in a room where, the clips of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, been playing, where everybody's just, got goosebumps. I mean, if you put fMRIs on everybody, everyone's brain would be lighting up in exactly the same way. And this is when we have the sensation of something very conceptual, of like what many African nations call Ubuntu, or what the Buddha referred to as Indra's net, this notion that we're all part of this infinite web, and in every juncture of that web is a crystalline diamond or water droplet that reflects every other one. And that I am because we are, simply. And, this is a very different way of experiencing one's life. And it's a very beautiful way, and that's unlocked through meditation, and as you say, through music. But meditation, particularly your breath, right, is something that you have for free at all times. I mean, until you don't have it, but right, it's right there, and not to leverage it seems like an awful waste.
Well, and even if it's not a waste, we would have to acknowledge, of course it's a waste, but there's like two things that no one's getting enough of. I don't care who you are. Two things. One is breath. No one's breathing enough. 7.6 billion people on this planet. No one's breathing enough. Most people are breathing incorrectly. Most people are mouth breathers, in through the mouth. You're not getting enough, and there's no filtration system. So that's insane, crazy. And so no one's breathing enough, and no one's getting enough love. I don't care if you're the love doctor. I don't care if you are the love mastery queen of whatever. You're not getting enough love. And we should be more receptive to letting love in. That will probably allow us to then, as we breathe, to let love back out. But we're not breathing enough, and we're not letting enough love in. We're love deprived and breath deprived. And imagine if we just, I don't know, set your phone at like 10, 12, 2, 4. I'm talking about like then taking a minute at like 4 times a day to practice metta. Take a long, slow, deep breath in. Feel unconditional love that exists throughout the universe. Feel it fill your heart. Your heart's so cute and finite. Metta is unconditional and infinite. So that can just come in, fill you, allow the breath to fill you also. And then like figure out, who do I want to direct this to? And then as you exhale, just send that metta. That's how you live in the divine abode, as opposed to visiting it. You know, and I'm just suggesting for like a minute 4 times a day out of 24 total hours. And if you're like, oh no, I'm really busy, you don't understand. Like, oh my God, you're too busy to breathe or receive love, and we know you're deprived in both of those areas. I believe this is how we can sort of like shift. And I'm so glad that you suddenly like popped off with, you know, the Brahma Viharas and Upekkha, because you know, like metta is like it's such an easy starting point for everybody because it includes love and the breath, and it's Tonglen, energy exchange, giving and receiving. It's like, it's got it all. It's like the perfect package for everything. And we could cultivate something from that. It's really hard to curse someone and plot their murder when you're breathing in the divine love of the universe, filling your heart with it, and then flowing it out to someone you care about. It's really hard to then simultaneously be like plotting.
Yes. Well, I don't think it is possible. You know, there's so many benefits that we could unpack to meditation. We'd be here for days. And we've alluded to them. I mean, just, you know, now there's these studies where they can show that the brain changes physiologically. It grows additional gray matter. Yeah. Obviously, meditation and its ability to improve sleep. And now we know we are starting to unpack the nature of sleep, and obviously all of its benefits around memory consolidation, but also the glymphatic system that purges the brain of these beta amyloid proteins and tau proteins that are associated with dementia, neurodegenerative diseases, etc. We know that meditation can lower cortisol levels, that it's a doorway into our neurology, our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, that we can, it's a tool that we can use to access what's happening below the crust of consciousness, which usually operates down there. Respiratory rate, heart rate, urination, digestion, all of these things that miraculously the body is generally just taking care of. Well, the breath gives us access to this and can bring us out of fight or flight or amygdala hijack or sympathetic overload, the stuff that these involuntary reactions to perceived threat that then have all of these downstream neuromodulator impacts. And obviously we know now that chronic low-grade cortisol can degrade the gut microbiome and cause intestinal permeability, which then creates inflammation and all this stuff. I mean, and, you know, and it can lead to hyperglycemia and raised glucose levels. I mean, all of this is science. And I mean, I know how into neurology and physiology you are. You talk about it at great depth in your books. And we could probably spend another podcast really untangling and unpacking all of those. But I do want to spend in the remaining time that we have together talking about meditation and its ability to address emotional trauma. And I say this against the backdrop of kind of these endless litany of statistics that people are producing now, and around overdoses from opioids, suicide rates, but also autoimmune disease and cardiovascular disease and diabetes and dementia and chronic diseases that we can't even understand why they are so efflorescent. And if you keep going upstream and you ask yourself, well, why do these things all exist? Oh, well, we know that there's a mind-body connection, and we know that people are suffering, are carrying forth trauma. Why are people carrying forth trauma? Well, they've suffered in some particular way from an event of neglect or war or abuse. Well, but then why is that happening? Well, we've created a world, a context, like a culture, which is toxic. And it's almost like if the snow on top of the mountain is polluted, it's going to have all of these downstream effects. And so when I, look at the sources, the root causes of so much of our societal dis-ease, I often land on emotional trauma. And I know that this is an area that you've given significant thought and work. So I wonder if you could unpack that a bit.
Yeah, it's powerful. We all have something. They don't teach it in school, how to recover. Our parents were typically a little too young to even know anything when they raised us. So whether they were the cause or something else was the cause and they didn't know how to soothe it or help us move through it, but everyone's carrying something. We're all carrying something, and maybe it happens to us later in life. If we continue, it was Dr. David Simon who said that 90% of our physical toxicity is emotionally derived. Yeah, of course, there's that 10% which we know is going to come from our environment or something else, whether that's, getting bitten by a tick or whether that's, being exposed to something, of course. But that means that there's a whole bunch that's being driven into us by ourselves, self-inflicted. Well, most of our wounds are indeed self-inflicted. And they're just how we are responding to the trauma, to the violence, to the abuse, to the horrors that were visually even shown on the news. Mm-hmm. We had all been sort of like, when we had been thinking about like what are the realities of war and stuff like that, maybe we've had flickers or glimmers of atrocities during Vietnam War or World War II, or certainly the Holocaust and death camps and things along those lines. Well, we just got suddenly, no one was expecting to suddenly be exposed to like, oh, by the way, in the 2020s, here's what's actually going on as well. So there are so many versions of traumatic stress. There's post-traumatic stress. There's pre-post-traumatic stress. There's secondary, post-secondary traumatic stress. There's vicarious stress. There's like, you could be suffering and I love you and I take on your stress and I never saw the thing or never felt the thing or experienced the thing that the violence perpetrated on you. Yeah. And yet I'm curled up in the fetal position and I'm incapable of moving forward. And this informs and impacts all of my decision-making going forward and probably everyone I'm interacting with as well. And now there's even like, complex, because there's too many trigger points that are happening to us. And we know, imagine we actually say, oh, well, the traditional forms are being physically, sexually, or emotionally abused. We're actually gotten to the point where they're like, oh yeah, those are the conventional ones. the outrageous, things that have happened to so many people. And we're like, well, that's that category. So what it seems to be is that it's more prevalent than we realize. Just like there's Prozac in our water systems, in all of our reservoirs. There's Prozac because so many people have taken Prozac for the last 25 years that now if you turn on your tap and take a sip, there's Prozac in there. It's become so endemic to who we are and what's going on. And so the world is beautiful. The world is magnificent. And this goes back to our conversation. And there's a lot of violence. And there's a lot of recklessness. And there's a lot of lack of safety in this space as well. And since we were never taught, how do I cope? We talked about our coping mechanisms. Each of us said, well, here's how you became a chameleon. I became a comedian, and it's like, okay, that's how we get by. That's just the surface stuff though. That was not, like, what about the torment inside? What about the invisibility inside? What about the physical abuse that I had to cover up with, sort of like we just saw Chris Rock do it, he was like, wow, he couldn't even integrate it. Didn't know. I mean, did brilliantly, but like couldn't even navigate, those few moments. I think there's been some magnificent work by Calhoun and Tedeschi primarily, but there's so many other, Kolb and a whole bunch of other, great researchers and professors and studiers and scientists in this area who've really studied this concept of post-traumatic growth. So what is a trauma? Simply put, it means that your world has been turned on its head. Whatever you thought the world was supposed to be, suddenly, no, it's not that. Shatters whatever your perspective of existence was, shattered whatever your dream was. It doesn't have to be, I had a white picket fence, type of, it doesn't have to be that. It means everything that you thought life was, this was, suddenly there's a giant shift. We all had a vision at 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 12, what life was supposed to be. And if at any time in that process, it got turned on its head, could be something as, even, Russia attacking Ukraine or the Twin Towers, which I thought I once almost bought a house so that I could look at the Twin Towers across the river every single day. I was like in negotiations. I was like, yeah, that's what I want. I want to see those buildings every day to remind me I can grow to the sky, whatever was going on in my life at that time, and then suddenly, boom, they're not there. I mean, I was actually on the 27th floor of a building watching Tower 2 collapse, and I had worked in Tower 2. And when that happened, my brain, which thought the world was like this, suddenly went, because I didn't understand that. I couldn't perceive it. I couldn't conceive it. That's just me visually experiencing that type of trauma. So imagine when you figured, life is safe and people who love me will take care of me. And then they visit, abuse or violence on you, or this is how things are supposed to be. And then the world gets turned upside down. So Tedeschi and Calhoun have done massive amounts of work on post-traumatic growth, which means that, yes, your world has been shattered. Your world has been turned upside down. But if you can work on a few very, very specific practices, and meditation is one of them, but that's not their lead thing at all. Excuse me. Then we can move from a state of PTSD to a state of PTG. And in that process, PTG has been actually proven to increase wound healing, decrease brain inflammation. But two really, really important things happen from that process. You find out what's really important in your life. When you've had a trauma and then you step back, you suddenly realize what matters on this path to growth. Not that you have meaning, not that there's meaning behind a death or an abuse or a violence perpetrated on you, but suddenly you realize as you pull back, well, I used to think that mattered. Does it still? And what matters now? So those moments of self-inquiry and self-reflection. It also helps you figure out who's in my front row, who's there to support me. And a lot of people, they don't reach out, or they just shrink in, and they will not experience PTG. If you step away from whatever support might be there, you can't experience it. You can't do this stuff alone. But one of the techniques that I've taken, there are years of study, and I've distilled it down into at least a first couple of steps. Practice is something that I call CFL. It's not the Canadian Football League. CFL. If we can see what's going on right now as a challenge versus a threat, that's the C. See it as a challenge, which is like, what an athlete going on to the field or the court or whatever, it's a challenge, not a threat. A threat is fight, flight. A threat is when you sense an attack or a threat to your physiology or to your belief systems, something you think you own. If instead you can see it as a challenge, it's like, well, it's tough. It's going to take some time and take some work, but I believe this is a process, and I'm willing to receive it as a challenge. We grow from challenges. We don't grow from threats. We knee-jerk from threats, and our physiology gets hijacked, and our hormones and chemicals get hijacked, and our emotional state gets hijacked. Really hard to pull yourself out. But if you could just start off the process. So wherever you are right now, if you're suffering, see whatever that thing is as a challenge to be overcome, a challenge to be met, a challenge to be greeted. It's not a threat. You're not in mortal danger now. You might have been, but you're not, right? If you're watching or listening to this, you're not in mortal danger in this moment. And that means this is a challenge. The F, we have to see this as finite, this stage of our life, as opposed to infinite. It's really easy. Even in the slightest thing, your heart's been broken. You think, I'll never love again. I'll be like this forever. Who am I? No one will ever love me. I gave the best years of my life, and blah, blah, blah. We can go on and on and on with whatever that thing is. But if instead we can see it as finite and know that this too shall pass. Gamze ya'avor. That was on the inside of the King Solomon's ring. We know that this moment too. This is part of impermanence. This is part of life. This too shall pass. It may pass in 5 years. And if you've had an extreme loss right now, this is not to mitigate it or gloss over it. We're not trying to get over it. You need to sit and grieve. You need to take that time with yourself. But see this as finite. See the pain and suffering as finite. And how do we do that? We actually create an artificial timeline. We wrap our fingers around some artificial timeline. You've just been diagnosed and you have to go through chemo. When's it start? When's it end? Don't worry about anything else. Just be here now. You just found out that your partner's been cheating on you, but only for 20 years. And now it's time for the divorce or separation. When does the paperwork start? And when are you free, fully liberated? We take these things as opportunities. So whether you've been dumped or fired or diagnosed or pick the thing or abused, let's make it finite. If we can chunk it down and suddenly realize this is not infinity or eternity, it's 6 weeks or 5 months, or it's actually digestible. I've lived X amount of years. I could certainly live another few. So finite versus infinite. And the L, challenge versus threat, finite versus infinite, and L, we have to somehow believe that we will learn and grow. You don't have to find meaning. Some things have no meaning. How could you find meaning in the death of a child? How could you find meaning from a random act of violence? But you have to believe that you will learn and grow from this. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not excusing it. In no way am I trying to whitewash over any of this. The reality is, if you can put your attention on challenge, finite, and learning and growing, there'll be sparks of PTG. Suddenly, you'll start to realize, you know what? That person looks like they're rooting for me. You know what? I think I have greater clarity on where I want the rest of my life to go. And you're not even aware that inflammation's coming down, that wounds are healing, that you're making peace with your past simply by doing that. If you could just cut yourself some slack. So I recommend that whatever's going on, if you can just begin the practice of CFL, because trust me, you're thinking about this stuff all the time. It's informing and infusing itself into every channel you watch, every coffee you order, every poop you take, every shower you have, every time you put on clothes, it's there. So why not turn it into this process for you where you begin to take back your life and master that process? This is just a toe in the water of healing. And of course, therapy is so critically important. And of course, talking to people is important. And of course, realizing that you're freaking awesome as you are, but you're wounded, you're damaged. And so you need to be kinder to yourself and only surround yourself with people who are rooting for you to succeed.
Beautiful. There's a Japanese art form known as kintsugi art. You familiar with it?
Golden thread.
Yeah. So it's often applied to shattered ceramics. It could be tea caddies or tea cups, bowls. But there's an analogy there where, we're all shattered in some way. Over the course of a life, we all have disappointments and we suffer at the hands of others, betrayals. And the wonderful thing about kintsugi art is that it takes these shattered ceramics and it reassembles them or reconstitutes them with molten gold. And when you pick up one of these, I'm not sure you've ever seen one of these things, I'm sure you have, but they're just the most magnificent pieces of art. And they have these golden veins through them. And in Japanese, they're known as precious scars. Precious scars. And this is what the experience of being alive is. It's picking up the pieces and reconstituting ourselves with all of our precious scars. So reassembling what in the Kabbalah, the shattered mind of God. And this is the examined life, and we know that there's no other life worth living, right? And
one of the keys to kintsugi is the reverence for the thing.
Yeah.
So it's not like, good thing we made a whole new thing. Don't worry about what it was. There's honor and reverence for what it was with the understanding, and we're even making it better, even more beautiful now.
Yes.
From its shattered aspect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the chameleon and the comedian, we might have to take it on the road. I love you, Davidji. You're a beautiful, beautiful man. And I so enjoy yoking with you. And I feel absolutely present and relaxed. And it's just a great, great honor and pleasure. So thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this interview from the Commune podcast, then click subscribe and check out this video right here.